Now, you talked about being a spotter. Now, did that come with being a squad leader?
Yes.
Okay, so that was part of a squad leader's responsibilities. Okay, now tell me about spotting. I've never been a spotter. So now what did that consist of? What did you have to do that right?
Well, actually, you use drift streamers. You know what they are.
Well, why don't you describe them?
A drift streamer was a piece of what's that paper?
Crepe paper.
Crepe paper. Take a piece of a roll of it, and you split it in two, crosswise, and then you unrolled it, and you put in two pieces of number 9 wire for a weight, and taped it in there, and rolled it back up and put a rubber band on it. And they were different colors. They were yellow and orange, and so they could be seen readily from the air and on the ground when they landed. And you'd fly over the fire and throw out the streamer right over the fire. And then you timed the streamer to the ground, because you want to have at least a minute, because I think it was, if I remember right, it was 1 minute for 1,000 feet. And you kept that in view, and then you could tell, you knew where you put the streamers out, and you knew where they landed, so you had an idea how much the wind was blowing and what direction it was blowing from. And then I used to like to fly back into the wind, and you'd count where your streamers hit. You'd count to the place where you dropped them, and then you'd get the same number count on the way again, and throw out another set, and they would go down into the spot or very close to where you wanted, and then you tell the pilot that you got jumpers in the door, and he'd make that run, and you'd give him left-right corrections and get him to fly right over that release spot, and you'd kick the jumpers out, and they would go down to the spot.
So you jump, what was the largest stick you ever put out the door?
Three.
3?
Yeah.
Okay. And anything about jump spots that you came to use as a rule of thumb? I mean...
Well, you had to be cognizant of cliffs and rocks and really tall timber. You didn't use those kind of places. You would go look for old burn that reproduction was in lodgepole and not too tall, or meadows or grassy hillsides or whatever. You know, it wasn't no big trick to identify a good spot and to recognize places to stay away from.
And did you ever have incidents when you were a spotter where you had trouble, the jumpers had trouble on the ground?
No, that's
pretty routinely then.
Yeah.
And what about in your case when you were jumping? Did you ever have trouble when you got on the ground with your crews?
Mm-mm. No, I went into a tree. That was been the first year I jumped, and because I missed the spot just by a little bit. I think I had it twisted in my lines, and by the time I got untwisted, I went into a tree, and I can remember I started to begin my letdown process, and I started to swing, and I was swinging right towards another tree. And I made up my mind, if I get there, I'm going to love that son of a bitch. and the tree that I was in broke off. And I fell quite a ways. I remember I hit the ground so hard that my knees came up and hit my reserve, and my reserve hit my mask and it cut my lip. And I bounced back up, because I had been on my feet, you know, and I bounced up and fell on my ass, and here come this top. Right between my legs. And it was like that. It would have drilled me, but it missed me. So that was one of my experiences.
Yeah. Well, did you ever have a need to drop a medical kit or anything like that? Incidents like that?
No. I can't remember if I ever did. I must have, though.
Well, how many jumps did you end up getting over those 7
Well,
years?
I had more than you would think, because the first year, I think we just had this, was it 6 training jumps?
7, I think.
7?
Yeah.
And then I had, I think, about 6 or 7 fires. And then I started going to Nomex to start, and then I'd come up here. And then I went to Alaska, and so I had those early experiences before the fire season started here. And being an overhead in Missoula, there was, when the training was going on, they would have jumpers show up and they'd have slots that weren't being filled, and so we would just go and volunteer. And so I had a lot of jumps, and then I was also in the winter times I was pretty good with the sewing machine, because that's what we did in the winter time. And I worked for equipment development, and we did all kinds of things. And whenever they had experimental jumps to test something, like low porosity parachutes and different size slots in the P5As and stuff like that, why we would go jump. So I actually, with the only 7 years of jumping, I had about 125 jumps.
Yeah.
Which is more than almost anybody else could have got in that length of time. But it was because of those early deployments to Nomex and Alaska and equipment development, and just being there when there was an opening.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of jumps. So did you work year-round those 7
Yes.
years? Wow.
After the first season, after the first year, I went back to school. Well, I got married and we settled down in Missoula. But then after that first year jumping, I was year-round.
So it was a big deal in your life.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a big part of that program. Was there anything about the parachute program, I mean, seasonal people like myself, I mean, we only saw a piece of it, but is there anything else about that that comes to mind that people might want to know about later on, about how that program was run?
Oh, I don't.
Do you think it was well run?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the Equipment Development Center, that was related to the parachute project?
Right. That was right there in the same building.
And they were both out of the regional office? Were they both out of the regional office?
Mm-hmm.
The jacket.
Pardon? Oh, see, Susan wants me to mention that the jacket. The old jacket was made out of canvas.
That's the jump jacket,
Jump
the white
jacket.
thing with the high
Yeah.
collar.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it was designed with that high collar, and it had felt padding in it. And then we came along and we got nylon. And this is nylon was this very short-lived material that we used in the jacket, because they came up right away with Nomex, and then we used Nomex. But when we went to the nylon and then to the Nomex, the jacket was it didn't accommodate the shoulder pads and stuff as well as it should. So I designed the jacket. And I put raglan sleeves in it as opposed to this square.
Mm-hmm.
So the sleeve came up to the armpit, and then it came up to the collar on top, and that was more rounded, and we put the shoulder pads in there that fit, because it was the insulate rubber, I guess it was, and you take a flat piece and cut it into a circle, and then you slid it, then you brought the edges together so it made a
On
cup.
the shoulder, yeah.
And that's I got $100 employee suggestion for that.
Well, that's cool. Is that still the design that's being used?
Yes,
Or it is, huh?
as far as I know.
Yeah.
And I happen to have in my possession somewhere here that original nylon jacket that I made.
Now, were you jumping or were you at the equipment development
I
center?
was in the equipment development, I was jumping,
Doing both.
doing both, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. And were there any other equipment developments that you got involved in?
Well, whenever they had something that they needed testing, if it was a parachute, I was involved.
You jumped the parachute?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, with different length of slots and different porosities and all that sort of stuff. I managed to weave something else.
So you're a test pilot.
I had one of my equipment development jumps. I had a ball of load line with a weight in it, and when you jumped, you released that ball, and it was 100 foot. So they could time the difference between when the ball hit the ground and when the jumper hit the ground. So they could figure out a rate of descent, and they were using that for information about these low porosities and different slots and different stuff. So I had several of those jumps, and so on one of them, I put my leg out, and the rope pocket was out the door on the step, and the damn ball came out of my pocket, and it was pulling down behind the airplane like that, you know. And Samsel was spotting, and he got his knife out. And I said, no, it's all right. So I jumped, and as soon as my parachute opened, I felt this tug, and everything was just fine. So I said, I developed a new system. You don't put the ball in your rope pocket anymore. You hold it in your hand. So I'm sitting in the door in a twin beacher, and I get hit, and I jump out, and I just threw the ball and checked my canopy, and then I felt a tug, and son of a bitch and line from the ball got my emergency ripcord handle and opened my chute, and by the time I put all this together, the chute opened between my legs. So I'm coming down flat now. I got my reserve chute is behind me through my legs, and I had the main canopy. And I kicked, and I kicked, and I kicked. I finally, just before I got to the ground, I got my feet underneath me. Otherwise, I just smucked
Face down.
face down.
Not good.
Oh well, I've had a few excitements, but
Yeah.